I put you to sleep with nonsense, drawing from life, the journal. I see faces on 6x4 sticky notes. They look this way and that, up and down. Their features are captured in watercolor, burnt umber, Palladian sky blue. And yet, on yet the second one, the eyes glance up, appear to look forth into the void, where you see every star that ever was, the newspapers rolled up as though for action. They sit lined up nicely in a little vase, nor do they wonder what happens and where and why. The folds of the stream gather, and they glance upwards yet again. Sheds lined up on a field look west, and yet their inhabitants always east. It's as though they have come undone at the seams. David Byrne knows, as done L. every day. Oh, yes, yesterday. No bigger than the smallest thimble, it also provides the warmth necessary for your greatest fear. While visiting Japan, I looked upon one. It was a bowl with a clock in its middle, a rose and a ribbon, and every ounce and every square meter of the paint with the fragments that danced along as though they had a purpose of their own. Not only that, but on April 16th, 2024, the sedge of hammer came down like never before. The winds were scattered, and yet it was as though this had been always the case, every day of every month, and the pillows were embroidered like you wouldn't believe. Scrows and and everything else came together. A quartz crystal. The bio-waste of forged centuries came forth, and yet they only stuck to themselves. It was as if they were bound up together with 5 keys in a line, A to Z, Z to 1, forever. Not only that, but the indices were scattered abroad, as though they had a purpose for that very fact. The cotton shirt you wear knows more than it tells you. The combination of H and 1 and 59 were mesmerizing. The glance to the left, the upswing, the acceleration, not only combined to produce 5,000 apples, but it did so with such pride. Pride, though tempered with humility. The alpha and the 1 and the absolute delight of 4x5. Mass Darwinian extinctions came about through clutter and through lemon juice like you wouldn't believe. Half of the ladder was through the roof, and the other half strewn about the ground as though scattered daisies were left to scance a covalent bond of their ever-growing, fierce determination. The oxygen removed itself from the professional, adequate core collapse. And not only that, but the radio sky came together to form a network of interstices and absolute denouement. More importantly, the testament began, and as such, generations came forth, with this and that and the other, as they said, and as they went. The largest body of water on the earth under a capstone. Perhaps Margaret Atwood factored in every leaf and the vase with the way the light gleams off of it, and yet the four legs of the four winds and every shed on every land, and the abstract ideals of the youngest among us. The great hope of every field is its grass, and not only, but every grass. And once there was a most remarkable horse who had a steed and a pig, and they both launched victory together. It was as though the 20th century had joined forces with every farm that ever was, and together they created a new vision, a vision for what could be and what never was, notwithstanding and not with sitting, but gathered amongst 45 bamboo shoots and the most obscure oregano you would imagine. It was inspiring for a moment, the way the leaves gleamed off the winds, and every terracotta pot gathered together to watch in admiration, rapt attention to the every angle. And near to 4 came the third and final chapter, in which every single duck pondered and pondered as though anew every moment. The beads on the line, the photos lined up as though somebody had a reason for doing such. The cast of the moon and the shadows no longer entailed destruction, but what they did was swoon and get every ribbon together with a singular purpose of vision. Every minute detail coalesced into a candy bowl full of coconut and a crystal with a ear to the N and the R to the 1 and 2. It was an inspiring time for the forefathers and the foremothers gathering round the villa as though an electrician had been there before. 2 electrons, 2 cattle, sinking in their own salt. The strangeness of that world never occurred until far, far later, when the years had settled down into the dust, and every minute detail of the 4 winds and the photographs came together, a final frontier of imagination. Galaxies are such that even the tiniest ball might launch itself into them and take them over with a veracity that would only be there through Van Gogh and Tom. The great hope of every field is its daisies, the chains of years, the chains with the helicopters launched around them, an apex of fruit and a basket of wheat. Not only do they look at us from the centuries past, but they smirk at us, not in arrogance, but with a knowing look. We have seen you, we have been there, they say, and every acre and every uncharted town. Lyle Oathward might have said, the GRA always bemuses. 90 degrees of red ink. Can you imagine that? Not only would the father of the mother of the able-bodied raccoon not know where to go with that, but the charcoal might even sketch out his path. With a distant horizon, a third of the screen might be taken up, and still beyond that we might hear from the other side. Julie once said, beget and begotten, which is one reason that Galileo wrote so many essays. He knew that the new frontier of apple plums was just the market he needed. And I ask you, where on which and which woo to? Which woo to? Similarly, the eye might behold every incandescent question that might beget itself upon our tongue, a professional microphone, a solace, a photo Don Ronten. The man approaches and has in his hand the stone of forgetfulness, the rhetoric that might beget nations, and this sleam that might never become. Such as it was, it embarked upon a voyage as to no other, the voyage that began as one yarn and a leaf on a blossom, actually transpired, and in that moment it set forth what would become the mass movement of daisies, continually ebbing and flowing through every vine of existence. He didn't only question the 1 and the 5, but he began to take a glance at the 5 and the 2. It was wrought expertly, with conclusion and vigor, and through that he came to the conclusion that every necessary apple comes through a maintenance of the greatest care, the equitable, the imaginable, and the prolific intertwining into one seasoned apple. Johnston belligered, apples be gleaned, and every candle from there to eternity had sort of renewed itself upon the hope that the chiselment of the factory and the equine gloriousness of that day might go into the future, well into the future. The bows, the clock, and the very USG, the very one. Shawnigan's eye was looking west, and still yet he shuddered to think of what he might have found in the garbage if he had only looked harder. Every casting glance, every perfection became a distant memory. It was the grand incentive of every artist, where art was hurled upon the shores of every bin at the store, and with recompense they gleaned every lid and every twine. It was inflective of the seasons and the historical moment of ages gone by. We forget now what it was like in those days, how well informed the plums were, how humble the dandelions were. And so we must remember, actually, we must not, because we cannot. And it is in that space of the echo of every gleaning airplane in which we see the fruition of calendar 1 and angle 2.4, wrought against itself on a note of minor discordance. The pestle and the mortar gambles away its pestle. The brass bell might ring, and yet wheretofore? Not only that, but eons of ages and ages cast a glance, this time to the south, and with that there was an immense amount of art that came about, featuring every single angle you could imagine, the D and the die and the dodecahedron of time. Oil paint slathered on a keyboard. And not only that, we began to wonder where the eggshells had gone and why. And if only we could summon the courage to ask such a question, we might embark on our final visitation to the temple of the Am, and the candle, and every single twist tie. It was heartening to think of such things. Once, on a farm, the oil rigger had cast up its glance upon me, and I wondered, on what visage, on what seasoned shore do thine eyes look upon thy servant? It was a sort of mustard ketchup sort of feel. I won't soon forget it. A perpetual amusement in my youth was to gaze upon every single L in a book, and a daily interest was to see every M on its opposite page, opposite in contractions, the omnibus of every book. Such a recollection emboldens one to consider the pleasure of reminiscence, the nostalgia of a garbage can, the fractioned waste of an old disused remote control. The milk press does many things such. It presses out the meaning of the month of June on and on in perpetuation on the Reiner of the inclinant and the income and the perspenten. But then one was announced yesterday in which the fabled noble replica came to the forefront as though on a quest, or more particularly at the end of a quest, and not any receipt was given. It sniffed nervously about the tills of the mind and went lingering to find Marie. From signs and signs, the stop sign, the yield sign, and the sign on which a toad might be discovered. It never was that way until it was not. And yet he laughs at himself with the recollection. How silly, he says. The affirmative noises of every tick-tock, every clock, every ounce of hissing. The horse, the deer, they all join in a cacophony of lyrical jazz. And even if they hadn't, why? Had they kept to themselves in the Moorish hills? Had they the Cordova bent? Had they the monster met? No one knew, and yet we must ask these questions generation after generation, as though we might get closer to the answer. Our national prejudices of ducks and geese, they form coalitions in which, beside every hill, there is an embarkation of gentlemen sailing with ants. It was quite a serious time then. The rock formations had gathered round the dresses, and all the dresses had banged pots and pans together for one last time. I thought to get up and go out into the cold, where the Dutch envoy might see every bristle on the beard of a vase. But the fantastic thing about it was that even thence they came to a place where it said corn cob cruise, and then they embarked on yet another fantastical equation. Yet their game was not over until every compliment had been cast 4 times. There was a certain demarcation of the clothing which you could readily identify them. the preacher wearing the garden, and the cat wearing every mouse it had ever eaten. They employed themselves with various undulations and retributions, the hopes, the calculating Aquarius of every garnered rendition of stickers and foam. Those parallel circumstances had a net effect of a newt and an apple shining in the distance, and even then they gathered yet more evidence, and the matters at hand espied and entrenched themselves in the understanding of the day. The mystifying experience of the neuron coming together to remain whole, while another fiddle played way in the distance. Given the importance of the carbon, it was understandable that everyone heretofore had slightly different understandings of the leaves strewn about the grass. It turns out that the green and the red and the apple had all met many times before, the organization of life almost studying itself in an ever-arcing grand gesture. And two unto the art and the glomp, and then the recognostar, and every apple globby bubble, every bubble the new and a zone, libing though based always, and then stay both tire and